The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the fourth day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in January 2021. And the Han, which is played, the wooden block, which is played at the beginning of the time for teisho, is sounding different. It was oiled yesterday, thanks to Shoke, and it's like it must have been thirsty because the sound is subtly different today. These are important things to notice, actually. We have so many opportunities for deepening our practice. And noticing subtle things like this is one way. It's a way of paying attention. And attention is really fundamental to Zen practice. It's fundamental to awakening. Attention is what gets us there. And it's important just in terms of our daily life. Our life is much richer when we are paying real attention to things. It's like the saying goes in Zen, even garbage glitters like gold. Things have a richness, almost a presence when we are fully attended to them. And as I said, that's of vital importance in our practice. It's something that we don't do so much. We have so many distracting things. And then if we've had any untoward events in our lives, that makes it even more almost imperative not to pay attention beyond the sort of the vigilance in case something untoward is going to happen again. What is life? Yesterday, you heard in an email from a student, there is nothing outside of God or Buddha nature. There's nothing outside of God or Buddha nature. And you've also heard that the scroll behind me over the Zendo, which was written by Mitra-roshi for Mountain Gate, says below the Enso, which is a representative of our true nature, out of not one thing arise the 10,000 things. And in that light, I want to share with you some of the Tibetan Buddhist teachings. The first is from a book called Introduction to the Nature of Mind by Dzogchen Pema Khalsang Rinpoche. This is the book. And here he writes, as long as someone is a sentient being possessed of a mind stream, the unaltered and unadulterated essence of mind itself, the true natural state is the threefold indivisible wisdom of empty essence, luminous nature, and all-pervasive compassion. Once more, he's describing our mind. As long as someone is a sentient being possessed of a mind stream, the unaltered and unadulterated essence of mind itself, the true natural state, is the threefold indivisible wisdom of empty essence, luminous nature, and all-pervasive compassion. There's nobody there. This person that we assume we are, at an absolute level, doesn't exist. It really doesn't exist in a relative level either, to be honest. And you heard about that in the first teishos of this sesshin, where we got into the nature of the brain and how it works and how memory works and how our mind comes up with our perceptions based on input of sensory perception, energy going into our eyes, energy going into our ears, energy touching our skin, and so on and so forth. And that's all there is, just those energies. But then there's a further cognizant aspect that computes all these things together and comes up with an assumption about what it is. And depending on our history and our conditioning, that assumption is going to be one thing or another. And no two people may perceive it in the same way. Let's share something else. This is from a book called Rainbow Painting, a collection of miscellaneous aspects of development and completion by Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, who he's dead now, the father of Yongye Mingyur Rinpoche, who, if you haven't yet read Mingyur Rinpoche's latest book, which is In Love with the World, a monk's travel through the barrows of living and dying, you should. So his father, who was highly respected and well known as a deeply realized master, he was a man of very low ego, which also comes with that level of depth. Because when we see clearly and deeply enough, we realize there's nobody to be invested in. And that allows tremendous freedom. Not to do whatever we feel like doing, because we're not usually inclined to do that, but to do what is most appropriate in any given situation, naturally, without calculation. This is what we're all capable of if we go deeply enough in our practice. And here's what Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche says. This basic state, the unity of being empty and cognizant, is at the very heart of all sentient beings. It is inherent within the thinking that takes place in all sentient beings at any moment. All beings possess the nature that is the unity of space and wakefulness. But not knowing this, it doesn't help them. Instead of being suffused with awareness that knows itself, which is our true nature, sentient beings become entangled in conceptualizing subject and object, thereby constantly and endlessly creating further states of samsara. And samsara is kind of the opposite of nirvana. It's being caught in delusion and all that manifests as a result of that. All this occurs because they do not know their own nature. And so the remedy, obviously, is to open to your true self. And we do that through the practice, through continuing the practice under every circumstance, even though we don't feel like it, even though we're too tired to poop, even though we have this reactivity against it. And I remember at one point, many, many years ago, when I was in sesshin and I thought, Mitra-roshi doesn't know what he's talking about. And another sesshin, I had no interest whatsoever in coming to awakening. I had no interest whatsoever in practice, which was actually rather dreadful to go through a sesshin like that. And thankfully, Mitra-roshi was wise and perceptive. And when I wanted to talk to him about this alarming state of affairs in my practice, he refused. He wouldn't talk to me about it. And so I thought, okay, then I'm going to have to deal with this on my own. I was used to that, basically. Not so much in practice. Well, yes, in practice too, but just in daily life. And then the next sesshin, and I'd always been accepted to every sesshin. I dutifully applied, thinking, well, something's got to give. Maybe something will be different next time. And then always in Rochester, the list of people who has been accepted for sesshin is posted in the entry of the Zen Center. It's called the Link Building. And for the first time ever, my name was not on it. And with sinking heart, I realized I did want to come to awakening. And again, wise and perceptive as he was, the next sesshin I was accepted to. And it actually wasn't long after that before I was passed on my koan. So these things can appear at critical moments, very critical moments, when we're actually getting, well, too close for comfort. And then the part of us that is invested in the status quo and afraid of change, afraid of liberation, throws up all kinds of dust in our eyes. And that is called Makyo. It happened to the Buddha himself. If you recall his enlightenment story, he had done 6 years of committed ascetic practice, deeply, deeply searching for the answer of why there is suffering. Why? We're born, we get sick, we get old, we die. Is that all? And why do we have to go through the sickness and all the vicissitudes of getting old in order just to die? What on earth is life about? And so when he realized that he was not going to find his answers through increasing ascetic practices, and in fact, he might lose his life, which was the way he would be able to find his answers only if he stayed alive, then he abandoned the ascetic practices, began to eat again very, very judiciously, taking just the water that was used to wash rice. So it had a tiny bit of nourishment in it, but not enough to throw his gastrointestinal system out of kilter, which will happen if you suddenly eat after a long fast. You could actually get quite ill if you do that. Your body just can't handle that much food after not having any food or almost no food for an extended period of time, even, a few weeks. So then he decided the only way he was going to find his answers was to go within. And really, that's the only way any of us are going to find our answers. That's the only way any of us are going to come to liberation, is through going within, searching within, because that's where we can realize who and what we really are. And so he sat down, crossed his legs, and vowed not to get up until he had his answers. So he was gravely determined. And about this, I can say that, in our great enthusiasm as beginning Zen students, I've known a number of people, including myself, that decided that was a really important vow to make, which it is. But I wasn't yet able to deal with the consequences of that decision cold turkey. And so people find themselves after an hour or so of sitting that way with that determination and that posture, which they're not accustomed to, they find themselves in a great deal of pain and anguish. And often that will really put a monkey wrench into the level of practice. That's why the Buddha talked about the middle way, neither extreme. He experienced both extremes. The wealth, the ability to have anything he wanted to have that was available in those days. And of course, if it wasn't available, people just didn't even know about it. And then the opposite, eating as it was said simply one grain of rice a day, and doing this kind of behavior for 6 years in his search. And then he realized the middle way was what was the only way to really find his answers. And so he did sit down, crossed his legs, and determined that he really would not get up, because he tried both sides of the coin. And now he knew that only in the middle there was going to be success. And as he was sitting, going deeper into his practice, the part of him, which is personified by Mara, the so-called Buddhist devil, began to object and throw up Makyo, basically. The first thing, as you know, was he brought his dancing daughters to dance before the Buddha and try to entice him into getting involved with them. And it didn't work. And so then he thought, okay, well, let's try something more forceful. And he brought about his herds and demons, his hordes of demons, and they hurled boiling mud and spears and lances at the Buddha. And this is a metaphor for what can happen to us, the pain in the knees, the pain in the back, and so on and so forth. And that didn't work either. And so finally, Mara pulled out his ace and said to the Buddha, "You can't do it. You don't have what it takes. Give up now. Forget about it." And that is something that I have experienced in my own life, in my practice, not now anymore, but there was a whole long period of time when that was the way I went through sesshin. And it's very common for all of us, particularly Americans. We somehow, there's something about our growing up that has taught us that maybe we don't have what it takes. Perhaps it's because most parents, unless they're pretty enlightened parents, and there aren't so many of those around, will be really great about telling a kid what's wrong with them and not much at all about what's right with them. And that can lead the child to a fairly obvious condition, that our assumption that they can't do it, they're not good enough. And that haunts us in practice. And that's one reason why practice can be challenging. But persevere, keep going. Keep going. It makes a difference. When you can open to this luminous transparency, this cognizant emptiness is another way to express it, that is so well spoken by the Tibetan masters. It is beyond words and immensely freeing. And that's who we are. We have these illusory bodies and faces and lives and assumptions. And when we die, that's the end of it. But there's something more. When that student yesterday wrote of everything, there's nothing outside of God, outside of Buddha nature. So that when we die, what happens? It's worth considering. We all assume, because we've plenty of times, well, maybe not plenty of times, it depends on your life. Most of us have seen one dead body or another, and it's clear that that body is not going to get up and dance, despite the purported habit pattern of Irish wakes, where they do actually take the deceased out of the coffin and dance with it. It's not going to talk to you anymore. It's not going to be who you thought it was. What happens? That personality. And babies, if you've ever seen a birth, babies come in with a personality already there. What happens to it? What happens to the energy that move the arms and legs and the tongue and the eyelids and so on of that body? There's so many subtle layers to this. Let's read again. As long as someone is a sentient being possessed of a mind stream, the unaltered and unadulterated essence of mind itself, the natural state, the true natural state, is the threefold indivisible wisdom of empty essence, luminous nature, and all-pervasive compassion. He also says, all phenomena of samsara are apparent, yet uniformly non-existent, like last night's dream, and are nothing other than part of the expressivity of Rigpa, which is emptiness, awareness. Like the sun and sunlight, all phenomena of nirvana have the perfect, spontaneously present nature of enlightened mind itself. Wisdom that fully pervades all of samsara and nirvana. And then Kala Rinpoche, in a book called Luminous Mind, The Way of the Buddha. Kala Rinpoche was a very highly respected Tibetan teacher, very highly respected Tibetan teacher. He used to come to Santa Fe too. There's a group of his students that actually, when we lived in Santa Fe, right down the same street was their little center. And there was a Bhutanese monk who was the sort of the head monk there, and everybody else was Americans. And we used to, we of Roshi Kapleau's group that came out to establish a country place, would go to each other's, I call it XTZ, the Extraterritorial Zoning Commission hearings. Churches are allowed basically anywhere in Santa Fe, at least certainly anywhere we were trying to locate, including in what they call the extraterritorial zone, which is beyond the city limits proper, but within the jurisdiction of Santa Fe. And the only thing is you had to go and be approved. So we would go and attempt to be approved, and the Tibetan group would come and support us, and we would go and support them because they wanted to build a stupa. And in the end, they got to build their stupa, partly because they located it in a part of town that was not controversial, whereas we made some mistakes. Anyway, and their practice was deep. Kala Rinpoche died quite a long time ago at this point. I don't know if it says here. It does say that he was compared to Milarepa, the greatest meditation master Tibet has ever known. He was born in Eastern Tibet in 1904. And he passed away in 1989. So this is what he says in this book. It's a teaching book. And first he quotes the Buddha. Buddha nature is present in all beings. Isn't that what was written in that email? But shrouded by adventitious illusions. Purified, they are truly Buddha. And here in chapter 3, The Nature of Mind, he quotes the third Karmapa, who I don't know who that is, but another Tibetan master, who has said, all phenomena are projections of the mind. And all you have to do is talk to a policeman who's interviewed witnesses of an accident. And he will tell you that as many witnesses as there are that many different versions of what actually happened. There's a movie called Rashomon, a Japanese movie, and it features a few men, three I think men. Actually, I think there were 4 actually, but they are sitting around burning, taking apart this mon, this gate, which is a great big huge wooden structure at a temple. Obviously, it's been dilapidated, so all they have to do is pull off a piece of wood and make a fire with it. It must be winter, very cold in Japan. And so to entertain themselves, they're telling a story. They're telling a story about a murder. And one man goes through and tells what he has seen. And that's played out in the movie. And then another man listening says, nah, that's not what happened. I was there too. I was hiding behind a tree. And this is what happened. And then you see his version of it. And then the third one, too. And they're all different. And if I remember right, I haven't watched this movie in decades at this point. I think the fourth man said, all 3 of you are wrong. This is what happened. And we all have our unique perceptions based on our culture, our history, our conditioning, our assumptions. And that's all they are. A story conjured up of energetic input into eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin, along with the ability to put these things together. And out comes the story. And this is what's really behind so much pain and suffering in our own lives and in the world. And these days, we're seeing a massive amount of it, a serious caricature of how people can see things so differently. All phenomena are projections of the mind. Mind is not a mind. The mind is empty in essence. Although empty, everything constantly arises in it. Through the deepest examination of the mind, may we find its innermost root. The actual experience of the essential nature of mind is beyond words. To wish to describe it is like the situation of a mute who wants to describe the flavor of a candy in his mouth. He lacks an adequate means of expression. Even so, I would like to offer some ideas that hint at this experience. The nature of pure mind can be thought of as having 3 essential, complementary, and simultaneous aspects: openness, clarity, and sensitivity. So just a different way of saying what these other authors have already said. And here he talks about openness. Mind is what thinks, I am, I want, I don't want. It's the thinker, the observer, the subject of all experiences. I am the mind. From one point of view, this mind does exist since I am and I have a capacity for action. If I want to see, I can look. If I want to hear, I can listen. If I decide to do something with my hands, I can command my body, and so on. In this sense, the mind and its faculties seem to exist. But if we search for it, we cannot find any part of it in us. Not in our head, our body, or anywhere else. So from this other perspective, it seems not to exist. Therefore, on the one hand, the mind seems to exist, but on the other, it is not something that truly exists. And remember what it says in the Prajnaparamita Sutra. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. However exhaustive our investigation, we will never be able to find any normal characteristic of mind. It has neither dimension, color, form, nor any tangible quality. It is in this sense that it is called open, because it is essentially indeterminate, unqualifiable, beyond concept, and thus comparable to space. This indefinable nature is openness, the first essential quality of mind. It is beyond illusory consciousness that causes us to experience mind as a me, possessing characteristics we habitually attribute to ourselves. But we must be careful here, because to say mind is open like space is not to reduce it to something non-existent in the sense of being non-functional. Like space, pure mind cannot be located, but it is omnipresent and all-penetrating. It embraces and pervades all things. There is nothing outside of God or Buddha nature. Moreover, it is beyond change, and its open nature is indestructible and atemporal, beyond time. And then clarity. If the mind is indeed essentially open in the sense explained above, it is not only open or void, because if it were, it would be inert. It would not experience or know anything, neither sensations nor joy or suffering. Mind is not only open, it possesses a second essential quality, which is its capacity for experience, for cognition. This dynamic quality is called clarity. It is both the lucidity of mind's intelligence and the luminosity of its experience. And then he talks about sensitivity. For a complete description of pure mind, a third aspect should be added to the first two qualities already discussed, which is sensitivity or unimpededness. The clarity of mind is its capacity to experience. Everything can arise in the mind, so its possibilities for awareness or intelligence are limitless. That's the out of one, not one thing, arise the 10,000 things. The Tibetan term that designates this quality literally means, quote, absence of impediment, close quote. This is the mind's freedom to experience without obstruction. And yet, we obstruct our experience through our conditioning, through our assumptions of something fixed, particularly an I. At a pure level, these experiences have the qualities of enlightenment. At a conditioned level, they're the mind's perceptions of each thing as being this or that. That is, the ability to distinguish, perceive, and conceive of all things. To return to the example of the dream, mind's inherent quality of sensitivity would be, because of its openness and clarity, its ability to experience the multiplicity of aspects of the dream, both the perceptions of the dreaming subject and the experiences of the dreamed world. Clarity is what allows experiences to arise, whereas sensitivity is the totality of all aspects distinctly experienced. But rather than talking about this, it's important to experience it for yourself. because that's what is liberating. And the sense that this is possible is what keeps us coming back to the practice, even as sometimes we don't want to do it. Those of us who stick it out long term are guaranteed to ultimately become free. And the freedom comes from opening to the experience of things as they are, and recognize that there's so much we're dragging around with us, so many habit patterns, so many assumptions, so many ideas, so many assumed needs. And when we see through that, it's like they become irrelevant and we're no longer caught by them. But this is a process, and it is an ongoing process. You've heard so many times, both about the long maturation in which we work on. As soon as we see where we're caught, we own it and allow it to be let go of, and choose not to indulge in it the next time the habit pattern would come up. And also that a single kensho is not you're not home free at that point. It's as I think it was Kala Rinpoche, actually. There's another book called a flash of lightning in the dark night. And the metaphor is that you're climbing up a mountain, you're feeling your way up this path, and it's pitch black dark, you can't see a thing. But you're gradually feeling your way up this path, and then there's a flash of lightning, and suddenly you can see the path ahead of you, briefly. And that's what a kensho experience is. It's briefly you're able to see the path ahead. Briefly you're able to see where you're caught, at least at a certain level. And the importance in practice is to continue that practice ever more deeply, ever more subtly, until all beings are liberated. All beings. And so here we are on this fourth day, very close to the beginning of the fifth day. Fifth, sixth, and seventh. That's all that's left in this sesshin. So give yourself even more deeply to this practice, especially the extended out breath, which cuts through conditioning, particularly if there is the yearning to be free, the yearning to know your true self, the perplexity of something isn't quite making sense in the regular world, and there must be something deeper. I know there's something deeper. Taking that and letting that ride the extended out breath, reaching beyond, always reaching beyond and beyond and beyond. And gradually, as it's said, it's like walking in the morning fog. At a certain point, your clothes become damp, but there's no clear demarcation between now they're dry and now they're wet. Keep going, because I have no doubt that you can reach what you're searching to reach. And I hope and pray that you'll go for the deepest understanding and not stop partway and not cheat yourself. I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.